So you get home from your photo shoot, you unpack your stuff, and you sit down to edit your images. And I wanted to walk you guys through a little bit about my photographic process and, more importantly, my post-production workflow. I've been honing this craft over the last 10 years or so, and the post-production workflow has definitely elevated over those years. I've learned some things, I've made some mistakes, and I'm hopefully going to be able to share a little bit of that in today's video with you guys. Now, this video is sponsored by Logitech. They were graciously enough to send out their MX Creative Console and also their dial pad for me to take a look at. And these two things work in tandem, so they work really well together for a variety of different programs, not just Adobe products, but they are very much tailored to the Adobe Creative Suite. Now, if you're like me, you've probably used Logitech products on and off for a number of different years. I remember getting my first Logitech mouse, I don't know, maybe 5-6 years ago now, and their products are just great. They work, they're really reliable, and so when they hit me up to check out their new Creative Console and dial pad, obviously I was very intrigued, and I said yes. Now, what I want to do with this video is show you guys a bit of my Lightroom workflow, chat a little bit about my organizational process, and show you how the Creative Console and dial pad fit nicely into my creative photography workflow. When it comes to the actual devices that I use on my desk, I'm very picky about what I put on there. I like my space to be nice and clean and organized, and I find that too much clutter really does inhibit me from the creative process. So when I think about adding something new to my setup, it definitely needs to tick a few boxes for me to be able to have it on my desk. The first is that it needs to be portable. I want to be able to bring this along not only in my office, but also on trips and other on-location shoots, whether I'm posted up in a hotel room or I'm back home in my studio. Bringing the devices with me is usually a pretty important component of that. Aesthetics is also a really important thing for me as well. I want them to match with everything that is currently on my desk and not look too distracting or out of place. I'm not a big color guy, so I really like clean earth tones and really minimal colors for the most part on my desk. And the third and final one being functionality. How does it work? How does it fit into my photography workflow? And does it actually help me at the end of the day achieve a better result more quickly? Over the last few weeks, I've been able to use the MX Creative Console and dial pad in my photography workflow, and I can honestly say that these tick pretty much all three of those boxes for me. The simple design of the Creative Console paired with the dial pad is actually really simple to use, and my favorite part is that you can configure it to whatever sort of workflow that you're working with. Pretty much every single button and dial can be customized for your specific workflow, whether you're a video editor or you're a photographer like myself. There's a lot of different options for how you can lay both of these devices out, and they work really well in tandem together. Obviously in this video, I'm going to be focusing on my Lightroom specific workflow, but just know that these devices can be used in a variety of different programs and workflows. So when it comes to the first and most important part of the process, which I think is organizing your images, I really like to organize all my files in a very specific way. Usually I have folders for different years, and then within that main folder, I have folders for different projects, and within that, I have different Lightroom catalogs for each. And a lot of people like to have one made catalog for everything. I find it to bog down my software quite a bit, especially because I shoot on a lot of medium format cameras. These file sizes are massive, and I want Lightroom to be able to run as efficiently as possible. So within each project folder, I do also have separate folders for raw files, exported images. If I have any video that I shot, that's also going in there. Project files for Final Cut, and also my Lightroom catalog. Now, this process works really well for me. I'm able to keep all my images extremely organized. I have everything organized for the last 13 years of taking pictures, and they're all organized on one single RAID device, which works great for me. Being able to have all my images stored on one single source makes it really easy to find images if I need to license them, if I need to send off fresh exports, or even just open up a new catalog and maybe start re-editing some old work. This is really helpful for that. Everything is backed up in multiple places as it should be. There's that saying, 2 is 1 and 1 is none. So I like to have at least 3 backups of everything that I've shot over the years. Now, when it comes to my actual photography workflow itself, let's go ahead and hop over to my computer and I'll share with you guys a little bit about my process. And we'll go ahead and edit some images that I shot pretty recently here. So when it comes to editing, I like to keep my approach as simple as I can. I usually try to find a look for the specific shoot that I'm doing, and then usually apply that and tweak it to each of the other photos that I'm working with. Here I have 5 photos that I shot a few weeks ago now. It was a really beautiful camping trip up in the Sequoia Mountains, and I'm going to be doing an actual separate video on this entire shoot and break it down how I was able to make this shoot happen. But today we're going to be walking through some of the images that I was able to shoot, and I want to show you guys kind of how I laid out the console and dial pad to work really well for my workflow. So the first thing that you'll notice with the console and how I laid that out is I typically like to work through sort of the first like 10 or so different choices that you have in Lightroom when you're starting with an image. And I usually like to start with exposure, work my way through contrast, highlights, shadows, temperature, all that fun stuff. So I've laid those out right here. So they're super simple and easy to find. And then you can also have multiple different pages. So I have several different pages on here for different things that I find useful. And the cool thing about the console is you can map very specific requests and filters to these buttons, stuff that would normally take, 4 or 5 clicks and a couple hotkeys, you're able to do in just one click. For example, I like to show all of my photos that have the picked icon or the flagged icon. And I also typically rate and color my images based on which ones I'm going to send out to certain clients. And you're able to have all of those in one single button, which is super nice. I also find that mapping a couple different presets is super helpful. Here I have 2 of my favorite presets that I use the most, and I'm able to adjust just based off of that. So I can click once for a preset. That applies the preset that I'm looking for, and then I'm able to adjust everything else with the dial pad. So for example, I want to bring up the exposure. I'm going to click that. And then I can use the dial pad, which is actually really nice, very easy to use and fine tune your adjustments. I like this a lot versus the plus and minus keys, which is what I typically use to adjust stuff like this. It feels very tactile, which is nice. So we're good with the exposure. I'm going to add a little more contrast. I like how that looks, like so. Bring the highlights down a little bit. That looks great. Shadows, bring those down a tiny bit. I like a punchier edit nowadays, so that's kind of what I'm going for here. And I've also mapped things like temperature and tone curve. You can adjust all of that from here, which I think is really cool. We're going to go ahead and adjust just the highlight region of the tone curve, which is what I feel like I adjust the most. I'm going to bring that down just a bit. And you can also adjust the darks. I have those mapped on here as well. I use that a lot. And you can fine tune your image very quickly. I find the overall workflow with the console and the dial pad very quick once you've mapped it for yourself. I think taking a little bit of time to actually go into the settings and customize everything is definitely worth your while. So even something simple like being able to copy all of the edits that I've worked with and paste those over on the next image that we're working with. 3 clicks and then I'm done. It's really nice, especially when you're working with a lot of images that have a similar sort of profile and color palette. You can usually just copy and paste your edits, which is super nice, and then adjust accordingly. So here, I'm going to adjust a few things on the contrast especially. I think it's a little too contrasty. I also think the highlights, I want those to be a little more punchy. And then we're going to go down to the curve and adjust that. So what I'm doing with the actual tonality of the curve as well, I think this is something that is very underutilized in Lightroom. A lot of people don't mess around with the actual tonality on the tone curve. There's a very big difference between adjusting the actual highlights in the image versus the highlight tonality on the tone curve. I would definitely suggest, if you haven't messed around with that too much, try to see what that does for your image. Because for myself, this is usually where I get a lot of the color palette that I'm working with in a photo. It's how I get my end result, is usually messing around with that tone curve. So again, I'm happy with this. We're going to go and copy, move along, and we're going to paste again. And these are all from a similar shoot, as I mentioned. So everything works pretty well for the most part. I'm able to copy the settings from the previous image and apply them to the next image going forward. And the cool thing is you can kind of adjust these buttons on the fly. So for example, if there's something that I want to be able to be mapped to one of these buttons, but I'm not seeing it here because I didn't add it, I can go ahead and go into the Logi options software very quickly. And then what I can do is just type what I need. So for example, I want saturation adjustment for this specifically. I'm going to add that over here, and then boom, within a couple seconds, it's already on the console. I can adjust the saturation accordingly, and then I'm right back where I was. So it's cool to be able to sort of adjust your workflow on the fly. And, each catalog, each shoot might have different asks and, different settings that you might need to adjust. So it's really helpful to be able to do that so quickly. And now for this last image, we're going to apply a slightly different preset. But the cool thing is if you've mapped a few different ones, you can kind of toggle back and forth between the two, which I'll find it also be very helpful. We're going to go with this one for this specific edit. Now we're going to go in with the dial pad, adjust accordingly. And I can switch between library mode and develop mode, which is super nice. Also, being able to zoom, very helpful. So on the dial pad also, you're able to customize any of the dials and buttons to what you find useful. For example, they come preloaded with stuff such as undo and redo, which is something that I use quite a bit in Lightroom. I like to be able to apply and edit and then just take it away, see how it looks. It works really well for that. You're able to customize all of these different buttons and dials to whatever you find useful. You know, when it comes to editing consoles, a lot of people find them to be too complicated to use, and they oftentimes hinder your workflow rather than help. I really don't find that with the Creative Console and dial pad. It actually does help a lot with my photography workflow, especially though if you spend the time to customize all the different buttons to your specific workflow. As I showed you, you can do it on the fly as well. And once that's all tailored to your liking, it speeds up your workflow pretty considerably. Once you get used to it, you know, with anything, it takes a little bit of time to work into your workflow, but I found it to be super helpful. I'm able to bring this on trips. I can throw it in my bag because it's so small. It works great for everything that I'm looking for. If you guys pick one of these up, Logitech's also including 3 months of the Adobe Creative Suite, which is awesome. If you are a photo or video editor or both, being able to use all that for free for 3 months, especially with how expensive it is nowadays, it's a pretty sweet deal, along with the actual console and dial pad. So if you guys want to check all that out, there'll be a link down in the description. Thanks so much to Logitech for sponsoring this video, and thanks you guys for watching. We'll see you in the next one.